Hello all, welcome back to my channel. As you can see, the setup looks a little different and it's because I've moved. So my partner and I have recently moved to a smaller apartment that just has a bit more of the things that we like, including the price point, but that also includes an east-facing window. So I now do not have to rely completely on my grow lights, and there are a couple of other factors that have changed for the better that I do want to get into for another video coming up. But in this video, I do have a bit of an emergency repot of a couple of plants and orchids. There are 3 orchids here and 1 plant, a calathea, that I do have to repot because of the soil damages that are going on. And there are things that were going on with the leaves and things that I can see on the outside that were going on that I knew there was something going on in the pot, because there was clearly nothing I was doing wrong with regard to the outer care of the plants. So watering, having it in a good spot, all these things were being cared for adequately, but there was just something going wrong. So we're gonna get into it in that video. And again, stay tuned because I will have a follow-up video once I find my microphone. So I do apologize that the sound is a little in and out here. I don't know where my microphone is, and I believe the phone microphone is being utilized currently, although I do have the earpiece in. So jumping right into it, I do want to repot my foul sweet memory because it was potted in a pot that for some reason the medium was turning over, and I will put a picture of that up. So I don't necessarily have a mold problem because my medium does not stay wet too long given the low humidity here in the desert, but I do have a problem with the water. And with, I think, 3 out of 4 of these plants, I did water them with my tap water when I moved. I didn't have my ppm checker, and I didn't assume that the water would be good, to be quite honest. I just took a chance, and of course the water was bad because we're here in the desert, and the water was horrible in my last apartment, and I don't know why. I just thought there was a possibility I would have another chance in this apartment. But the water was bad, and again, I probably already have put up a photo of what my bark looks like. It looks like mold is growing on it, but it's not. It's the mineral buildup that builds up on the medium as the water dries too quick because we don't have a lot of humidity. So because the evaporation is very quick because it's so hot, and we don't have a lot of humidity to sustain the pots, the mineral content is left in the pot from the tap water after evaporation. And just to give you a gauge, my tap water in DC was about 125, the highest 175, and that didn't leave any residue on my plants. The tap water here is like 450, 500, so there's a gauge. And let's get into the repotting. So I actually have a mix of sphagnum moss here, a bit of the cheap version that I just got from my local department store, and from a nursery I actually purchased some orchid bark. So the thing I thought was very interesting about the orchid bark here was that it is extremely fine, almost like mulch. So it's most likely very, very fine bark that is basically pulverized to look like dirt, and it's sold as orchid bark here because in the desert there's no moisture retention. So this is probably going to do my plants fairly well, and I'm trying different setups here. For my first plant, the Sweet Memory, I am doing an enclosed setup, so there's no drainage here, and I do have a bit of experience with pots with no drainage. So we're going to start with the orchid bark. And actually, I should probably move this up here to minimize the mess. Starting with the orchid bark, we're gonna throw that in there. Make sure it's at the bottom there. Normally I start with sphagnum moss at the bottom of my pots, but because there is no drainage here, I'm gonna just start with the orchid bark because the water that, I don't know, maybe if there's water that sits at the bottom, which will most likely happen, it'll slowly degrade the bark and I can feel the weight at the bottom of the pot. I don't know why my brain thinks that this is the best option, but I only feel this way because this is mulch. So I feel like it's gonna wick the water up, but it's also gonna provide some aeration all the way at the bottom of the pot, which will postpone my repotting. Because one of the reasons why I do orchids is a lot of people think they're hard, but I think they're very minimal, and if you can get the potting right and your conditions right, you really don't have to do much with the plant, to be quite honest. So basically what I'm doing is alternating between the moss and the bark, but I'm making sure that the moss does touch on each layer. So although it's alternating between orchid bark and sphagnum moss, I'm making sure that the moss, see, this is the moss from the layer I put there. I'm making sure that each moss layer is touching the next one so that the water wicks up. I don't want to say evenly, but I want to make sure the water wicks up because, again, although this is a very fine orchid mix that we have in here with regard to the bark that I'm using, it's still bark, so the water retention isn't going to be very heavy until the bark starts to degrade. So bark is really good for aeration and making sure that things are not only retaining a bit of moisture, but retaining a lot of air. So even though the bark is fine, I know that essentially it's looking to promote aeration. So we just want to make sure that we have enough sphagnum moss. See, I have moss connected all through the pot. You can see the moss there from the last layer. I'm gonna put some more moss in here and then top this baby off with some bark. I like to, I learned this from Miss Orchid Girl, but I like to put fertilizer in the top layer of moss that I'm using because it's gonna fall into the pot anyway. And it seems that because sphagnum moss is very, very moisture retentive, it's gonna also hold a lot of the nutrients. So I'm gonna add that in now. Pardon me for blocking the camera like that. I switched to this Osmocote, and this is no endorsement or anything, but I switched to this Osmocote fertilizer because it's an all-purpose fertilizer and seems to do pretty well with the orchids. So I can also use it with my houseplants. And another reason why I'm mentioning this type of fertilizer is because I don't like to do a lot of work. So anything that I can drop in the pot and it'll work for me in the long run is just a plus. Like, it's just a plus for me. So I'm gonna use it. So I use the Osmocote fertilizer because I can use it with my houseplants and I can also use it with my orchids. So I'm not gonna pack this too tightly. I'm just gonna pat on it very lightly so that, shake the pot so that everything falls nice and neat in between any crevices that are there, and so that the fertilizer falls all in between the pot. So there we have it. That's nice and potted up. I did water this plant before pulling it up the last pot, and the moss that I'm using is slightly damp, so we are not gonna water this, but we're gonna put the tag back. So that's the first plant. The next plant that we have is a Rinco stylus, which is very closely related to the Vanda family. One of the problems that I had with this was that it was actually outside. So it was on my balcony and it got horribly burnt by the sun. And the medium that was in here It was also about 2 years old, so naturally it was just due for a repotting. So basically what I'm doing now is I'm double cupping this because I do know that this genre or this type of orchid does like aeration, but because I live in the desert, I need a constant source of moisture. So I will be covering this slotted pot with a bowl that covers at least the bottom so that I can keep some moisture down there, some good humidity, and then dryness at the top for good aeration. So for this one, we're gonna do the opposite method. We're actually gonna start with sphagnum moss at the bottom of the pot. See, this cheap moss always has these really long strands of, I don't know, I guess this is what the moss grows from, but it always has this really long strands in here and I don't like that stuff. Yeah, here we go again, a bit thicker. So I'm gonna put some moss at the bottom, take out these stems that I do not like. Put some moss at the bottom of the pot. There we have a bit of moisture retention at a spot that we would normally lose water, since this pot is well ventilated on the bottom and on the sides. Place the plant in the pot, and then we'll throw some bark in there. Again, this is some really, really, really fine bark. I've never seen this fine of a bark mix advertised for orchids, but because I live in the desert again, I'm really not surprised. So this, I don't mind it being layered because it's a vanda, so the moss, I'm not worrying if it's touching areas at the bottom because these roots are gonna go crazy and they're used to lots of aeration. And the fact that this, I guess this bowl is slotted, I'm not really too concerned about aeration. I'm really concerned about the moisture retention, but at the same time, because this is in the Vanda family, I'm not concerned about the moisture retention. So again, the more you learn about your plants and the more comfortable you become with your environment, you can't really take advice from just anyone, like not even myself. You really have to just learn what works for you. And I feel like my wrinkle stylus is gonna work in this oddly layered mix because I know the growth pattern. So on this one, because it's very mixed with the moss and the bark, I'm gonna throw the fertilizer in on the top of the bark here, but I'm just gonna throw it towards the middle. And then cover it with the mix of bark and moss. Because again, unlike the Phalaenopsis, the Vandas can go completely dry, so I'm not really concerned about some wet spots and some dry spots when it comes to this plant. I'm really only concerned about the light. I thought that it was going to be able to stand in like full sun, but maybe it can, but just not in the desert. Not in the desert. In the desert, full sun is like basically reserved for cactus. And right now, this used to be on my balcony, but right now I only have cactus, my one cactus plant on my balcony. And I say one plant, even though it's 2 pots, because the bottom half fell off of the cactus and I replanted it and it started growing roots, so there you go. It's in 2 separate pots as 2 plants, but it's the same plant. And this is basically done. So I may water this only because the mix that I took it out of was extremely dry and I took it out later than all of the other plants. No, I think I'm just gonna let it sit in this for a while because again, I did bring all my plants except for the cactus from the balcony inside, and I rather it go completely dry inside because I have humidity and I have the AC on, so there's a drop in temperature. I rather see how this does after everything goes completely dry than douse it in water. Next plant. Ooh, so we're gonna do I got this weird velvety looking calathea, and it was on sale for like, I don't know, $1.50 or something like that because it looked horrible. But I do have some new growth growing at the bottom. I don't know if I'll be able to find it. I don't know if I have the patience to sit and look for it because it's very tiny. But anyway, I'm putting this in an enclosed type of setup because I have an aeroid in an enclosed setup, and I've learned that aeroids, my alocasia, which I have, maybe I'll put a picture up, but my calathea are similar to aeroids in the fact that they like humidity and they like a good amount of light. So this sits in my grow space in the east facing window, but it used to sit in a very tiny pot that lost moisture very quick. So I'm gonna put it in an enclosed setting with all moss. Well, I'm gonna use mainly moss and a little bit of this bark. See, put some moss at the bottom there. And I'm just gonna, put the moss in there. I'm only using bark to weigh down some of the moss as I put it in the pot because I've learned that from the other plant. And because this bark is really fine, I think it's gonna fare well in the closed setup I'm going for. So I don't want it too, I don't have this in frame. I don't want it too deep, so I'm making sure that the base of the plant is sort of at the top of the jar. But I am making sure that this mix I'm putting in here is well versed. So this moss and this bark is gonna be all over the pot. I know everything is like sticking to the roots of the plant, like the moss is sticking to the roots on this side a lot. And the bark is like falling on this side. I hope that doesn't cause too much of a challenge for me, but this is what I want to do. So again, I'm trying to just throw in bark and moss all at the same time and have it settle in evenly at the bottom of this jar / pot. All right, looks like it's starting to settle in, so I'm just gonna push it in with my hand here. All right, so nope. I thought the bottom of the roots were settled, but we're gonna put some more medium so we can settle the bottom of the roots so that the plant stops swiveling around. Okay, perfect. And again, this moss is slightly damp, so I actually, because this is enclosed, I shouldn't have to water this till my next days off next week. And sometimes with these enclosed ones, you don't even have to water till like once a month. And I have quite a bit of moss in here, so I may only have to water this like once a month, twice a month tops. My alocasia gets watered once a week because it's sitting in pretty direct sunlight. Well, not direct sunlight, but it gets a lot of the heat from sitting on the top shelf in my grow space in that east facing window. So I noticed that the moss dries out pretty quick. So I may move it, but the leaves seem to enjoy the light. So I'm leaving it there and just watering it once a week. Sometimes a little more than that or a lot more than that. I don't know what I mentioned in the video, but I mean just now, a few moments ago. But I do water that alocasia now that I'm really thinking about it quite a lot. I don't know if it's every other day. All right, so this is getting full. So I'm gonna slow down and just start pushing some of this medium in slightly, making sure that it's even around the top. I keep going out of frame, I'm so sorry guys. I gotta get used to this spot here. So basically what I was doing was just slightly pushing the medium down and making sure that I can cover the base of the plant because the base of the plant is pretty high up in the pot, but I do want it to be high up because I want to monitor. Maybe I'll actually put some moss slightly at the base. Yeah, I think I'll do that. I was gonna put bark at the top, but I'll put some moss around the base and just keep it really light. Yeah, nice little layer of moss. I think the moss would promote either leaf growth or root growth because I'm not packing it in. It's very, very light at the top here. So whether it retains moisture or not, it'll be pretty easy for something to go through. But I think it's gonna retain moisture more than not, given how packed that is. And again, it is packed in there, guys, but I don't know if you can see there, I have left quite a bit of small air gaps because I know everything is gonna settle. So this base, sorry, I keep moving out of frame. This base is probably gonna settle a bit more into the jar in a couple of months, maybe a couple of weeks as the watering progresses. But I don't see myself watering this too much. All right, so that is done and we're moving on to the last one. And that is a foul. So it basically had the same thing going on with this with regard to a lot of calcium buildup on the bark that was in here. And this is going right back into the same double cup method that I used. I soaked the cups in some Dawn soap, hopefully I killed anything that was in there. But again, I don't think there was anything wrong bacteria-wise. I do think that there was just a lot of mineral buildup. So we'll start this with some moss at the bottom. Not a lot. Oh, actually, let me remove that cup. Not a lot of moss at the bottom. Actually, that might be a lot, but I don't mind because, again, my aim is to not water so much, but at the same time, keep a bit of water retention. So I'm actually just throwing a handful of moss and bark rather than trying to scale some type of measurement. So I'm just making sure that there's moss and bark in the handfuls that I'm picking up here so that everything is just touching. Sorry guys. I was tired of measuring, and with these standard phals from the grocery store, you just really don't have to be as meticulous as, I don't know, as like a calathea or something, or like a prayer plant. Prayer plants, I would say be pretty meticulous in your potting, unless it's a closed method. But with orchids, you don't have to be that meticulous because, especially with these standard phalaenopsis that you buy from the store, because they're okay with completely drying out, just go crazy. And they're okay with being completely moist too. In an all sphagnum moss setup, you just can't water them as much as something that's going to aerate, such as bark. And this is why there's such a heavy argument between like what you should pot your orchid in. It really just depends on your environment. It's literally environment specific. And coming from DC, a place that had a lot of humidity, my entire collection could probably grow in a different variation of bark sizes: small bark, medium bark, large bark, and maybe some moss here or there. But here, where the temperatures are consistently high, there's a lot of sun, and there's no humidity, like, I don't know how anyone's doing it without moss unless you're watering more than normal. But that's gonna wrap up this repotting video because I'm at the end of repotting this phal here. And again, I have just a mix of moss and bark that I'm not caring how much I'm picking up in each handful. It could be 50-50, there could be more moss than bark, but I think there's more bark than moss no matter what, because the bark is so fine. So I'll definitely monitor the progress specifically on these 4 plants, which is something that I really don't do, but I will monitor the oops, spilled some fertilizer there. I will monitor the progress because I've never used an orchid bark that was so fine. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'll put my handles up on the screen as with all my videos, and hopefully I'll have that that general July, June, summer, excuse me, that summer update up about my entire collection, orchids, houseplants, or whatever. Hopefully, oh shoot, I just realized I probably shouldn't be dumping fertilizer down the sink. I normally dump it outside in the grass. But yeah, I'll be doing that and hopefully uploading a video of the declines as well, because I have quite a lot of stuff that went wrong with the temperatures, the sunlight, over fertilizing, underwatering, overwatering. I think I did just about everything wrong during the move to the desert and the move to this new apartment, and I will let you guys know in some upcoming videos. But till then, thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. See ya in the next video.